The ship tore through the red clouds of the alien training planet, leaving a glowing trail behind. The ground below looked lifeless. Cracked earth, dry air, no sign of water or food. To the alien instructors watching from the tall silver tower, it was a perfect place to break the new species. This was the survival world known as Test Zone 13. Among the arrivals stood one human, Private Eli Grant. He was tall, quiet, and carried a tired look, the kind that came from long missions and longer nights. His brown hair was cut short, his uniform still dusty from the shuttle seat. He looked around as if studying every rock, every sound, every shadow that moved. The other recruits, creatures with forearms, scales, or wings, were already panicking. They shouted in fear, argued, and searched for water. But Eli didn't move. He stood still and stared at the sky. Up in the tower, Instructor Kalor folded his arms. "Another mammal," he said. "They all panic by sunset." His assistant, a thin insectoid with a sharp voice, laughed. "Humans talk big, but let's see how long he lasts." Eli dropped his small bag on the ground and crouched. He ran his hand through the red dust. It felt like powder. No life, no moisture. He smiled a little, almost amused. "Dry but workable," he muttered to himself. He began to dig, not deep, just enough to test the soil. The others looked at him like he had lost his mind. One large reptilian recruit shouted, "What are you doing, human? We need to find the shelter." Eli didn't answer. He just kept digging. The sun was brutal. Every hour felt longer than the last. By the second hour, 2 recruits had fainted. One begged the invisible sky drones for help. The instructors watched with interest. They had seen this before. Every new species thought they could handle it. None did, but as the shadows grew long, Eli finally stood. His hands were covered in dust, his face streaked with sweat. He walked toward the wreck of the drop pod, opened its back panel, and began pulling out metal plates and tubing. The instructors leaned closer to the monitor. "What's he building?" one asked. Eli worked in silence. He used the plates to form a small wall, then placed a metal rod upright in the ground. With cloth from his uniform, he built a simple sunshade. It wasn't much, but it was enough. By nightfall, while others screamed from cold wind and darkness, Eli sat calmly beside his little shelter, chewing on a ration bar. He looked like a man on a camping trip, not a dying soldier. Instructor Kalor frowned. "He's too calm," he said. "They always panic the first night." The assistant tilted his head. "Maybe he's broken inside," but Eli wasn't broken. He was watching the stars. He counted them one by one, his lips moving in quiet rhythm. To him, this wasn't just a test. It was an opportunity, a chance to learn how to live anywhere. As midnight came, the temperature dropped. The alien recruits shivered, cried, or tried to hide in the wreckage. Eli moved his shelter's metal pieces to trap heat. He gathered dry dust into a small pile, used his ration heater, and created warmth. He sat close, rubbing his hands together. For a moment, he thought about home. Green fields, fresh air, laughter from the old Earth base. He missed it, but he didn't show it. He whispered to himself, "If there's soil, there's life." Up in the tower, the instructors kept watching. "He's muttering to himself," one noted. "That's the first sign of stress." But the chief instructor, a tall figure with glowing yellow eyes, shook his head. "No," he said slowly. "That is the sound of someone planning." By dawn, when the red sun rose again, Eli had already been awake for hours. He had walked far from the others, carrying a small metal container. He stopped near a flat area where the ground looked darker, dug a hole, and poured in melted condensation from the pod's cooling system. The instructor zoomed in on the feed. "Is he watering the ground?" one asked, confused. Eli nodded to himself, satisfied, and returned to camp. Later, he took the small emergency ration seed pack from his belt, a few earth plants meant for oxygen generation. He held them in his hand for a long time, staring at the tiny shapes. "Let's see what you can do out here," he whispered. The others were too tired to notice him. One begged for food, another cried that the air was too thin. But Eli stayed calm. His movements were slow, careful, almost peaceful. That night, he built a small marker beside his shelter, a stick with a piece of metal tied to the top. When the wind blew, it made a faint ringing sound. The other recruits thought it was madness. The instructors thought it was a waste of time. But Eli smiled when he heard it. The sound meant direction. The sound meant order. By the end of the second night, the alien monitors listed the humans' stress level at minimal. His heart rate was steady. His camp was organized, and instead of sending a signal for rescue, he slept under his tiny shade, the sound of his metal wind chime echoing softly through the alien night. The chief instructor recorded one short note in the report. Human subject shows abnormal behavior. No panic. Possible miscalculation in psychological projection model. No one in the tower noticed the small green patch forming near Eli's first dig site. It was faint, almost invisible under red dust. But it was there. Life had already started. The morning came with a dull red light spreading over the desert sky. The air shimmered like hot glass, and the alien recruits dragged themselves out of broken pods hungry, weak, and afraid. Only one seemed awake before dawn, Eli Grant. He was kneeling on the ground, carefully turning the red soil with a small metal tool he had made from scrap. His movements were slow, precise, and almost calm, like someone tending a quiet garden instead of standing on a death world. From the observation tower high above, Instructor Kalor's patience was already running thin. "It has been 12 cycles," he said, tapping his claw against the glass. "Every species cracks by now. Fear, dehydration, or madness. But this one, this human, he keeps building things." His assistant leaned over the console. "Maybe he's too stubborn to accept reality. Or too stupid to feel fear," Kalor muttered. On the monitor, Eli stretched, then looked up toward the sky camera as if he could feel their eyes watching. He grinned slightly, almost teasing. Then he began working again, drawing lines in the dirt with a piece of metal. The instructor zoomed in. He was shaping the land. Long rows, each evenly spaced, each carefully marked. "Is he writing something?" one alien asked. Kalor squinted. "No, it looks like a pattern." Eli paused and checked the small patch he had watered the day before. A few of the seeds were gone, blown away by wind, but a couple still remained buried. He pressed the ground down gently, humming a quiet tune from Earth. He didn't know if the seeds could even live here. The soil was alien, the air thin, the temperature cruel. But he wanted to try. That was what humans did. They tried even when it made no sense. Later that day, a violent dust storm rose from the east. It came fast, swallowing the horizon with red smoke. The alien recruit screamed, running for cover, but Eli didn't move. He crouched, covering his seedlings with scraps of metal, then braced his small shelter with the remains of a broken panel. The wind howled for hours, ripping through the desert like claws. The alien tower shook under the pressure. When the storm finally cleared, the instructors checked the screens, expecting destruction. Most of the recruits' shelters were gone. Some of the creatures had already sent distress signals. But Eli's camp, though battered, still stood. The metal shade held. The water container was intact, and the tiny patch of soil still showed the faint signs of life. Instructor Kalor stared in disbelief. "He protected the dirt," he said softly. The assistant blinked. "He protected the plants." They both turned to the central monitor. Eli was standing now, face covered in dust but smiling faintly. He looked at the ground, then at the sky again. "Still here," he said to himself. "Still growing." By the end of the next day, the humans' camp looked organized. Too organized for someone on a survival test. He had marked areas for food, for tools, for rest. He even made a simple fence out of wires and rocks to keep scavenger creatures away. Every move he made was purposeful. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He built. The alien observers began recording his routine out of curiosity. Morning inspection of soil, midday repair of tools, evening journal. Though the human didn't have a book, he spoke his thoughts out loud, talking to the wind as if it listened. "Rule of 30, Eli said one night. 30 days to prove we can survive anywhere. But surviving isn't enough. You need something worth surviving for." He looked at the little plot of ground again. It wasn't much, but it gave him purpose. Something about seeing color, green against red, kept his spirit alive. In the tower, the instructors were having their own debate. "This is unnatural," the assistant said. "The human is supposed to focus on endurance. He's wasting time trying to grow food." "Maybe," Kalor replied. "But he's still alive. Look at the others." Most of the recruits had stopped functioning. Some lay still, too weak to continue. Only the human kept working, sweating, bleeding, smiling. He was even humming again, an earth song no alien could understand. By day 10, reports from the other sectors showed complete collapse. Every other species had activated their distress beacons, all except Eli Grant. He had used his beacon battery to power a small light rig for his crops. When the instructors realized this, the tower filled with laughter. He turned his rescue signal into a lamp, one shouted. But the laughter slowly faded when they noticed something else on the feed. Tiny green stems poking through the dirt. Actual growth. Life Kalor leaned forward. Impossible, he whispered. The soil is sterile. The assistant checked the readings twice. Not anymore, he said quietly. The chemical levels are changing. He's mixing ash and moisture from the pod coolant. He's engineering the soil. Down on the surface, Eli wiped sweat from his forehead and stared at the little sprouts with wonder. Welcome to the world, he said softly. Sorry it's a rough neighborhood. He didn't know the entire galaxy was watching him now. Every instructor, every analyst, even the council above had tuned in to see the strange human farmer on the death world. They had expected fear. Instead, they saw patience. That night, when the stars came out again, Eli sat beside his small patch of green and whispered to himself, if it grows here, it can grow anywhere. In the tower, Kalor finally broke the silence. Begin a new file, he ordered. Label it. Human Behavioral Anomaly. He didn't say it aloud, but deep down the alien instructor felt something strange. Something like respect. And for the first time in years, the test was no longer about survival. It was about understanding why one small, stubborn human refused to break when every law of nature said he should. The third week began with silence. The storms had passed, the heat had eased a little, and the alien instructors expected to see another empty camp by now. Most species had either failed or begged for rescue. Yet when the first drone feed came online, the tower filled with quiet shock. There was movement at Human Site 12. Private Eli Grant was kneeling again, his sleeves rolled up, his hands buried in the red dirt. The camera zoomed closer, and every alien in the control room leaned forward. Tiny green shoots pushed through the dust, trembling in the wind. Living plants, on a planet officially listed as sterile. Instructor Kalor froze. That's impossible, he whispered. There's no nitrogen in that soil. Nothing can grow there. The assistant replayed the feed in slow motion. Eli was tending to the sprouts with incredible care, covering them with shards of glass to protect them from wind, pouring water through a tube made from melted plastic. His face was tired but proud, his eyes shining as he watched the fragile leaves. He wasn't surviving anymore. He was creating. When the sun rose higher, Eli adjusted his small shade screen to protect the plants. He hummed softly, maybe an old Earth song, something calm and steady. The kind of tune a farmer might hum while working in his fields. He checked the temperature with a scrap of reflective metal, moved stones to trap moisture, and smiled when one sprout leaned toward the light. Unbelievable, the assistant muttered. He's teaching the plants to follow the sun. Kalor shook his head. No, he's teaching us something. The other recruits were long gone now. Their signals had faded, their camps abandoned. Only one remained, one stubborn human surrounded by little green miracles. The instructors zoomed out the camera. Around Eli's camp, the ground looked different, darker, richer. The air readings even showed a trace increase in oxygen. He's changing the atmosphere, said one of the analysts in disbelief. Eli didn't know he had an audience. To him, it was just quiet work. He had grown up in a small Earth colony near the Rockies. His parents were botanists, his grandparents farmers. He remembered his father's words. Even in the worst soil, life finds a way if someone gives it a chance. Now, on a dead world far from home, those words guided every move. At night, Eli sat by his crops and talked to them. You're doing great, he whispered. Little weird place, huh? But we'll make it ours. The drone caught his voice and the aliens listened in silence. They didn't understand. Why talk to plants? Why care about something so small in a place designed for pain? The chief instructor finally said, this is not strategy, this is something deeper. Days passed and the green patch grew larger. Eli built small trenches to channel water from his cooling unit, using rocks to slow evaporation. He even collected a few strange crystal bugs that wandered near his camp. They left trails of mineral dust behind which he used to fertilize his soil. Every little thing had a purpose. Every failure turned into another tool. When a supply drone passed overhead, it dropped a small sensor beacon. Eli ignored it completely. He didn't ask for help. Instead, he used its broken parts to build a reflective dome to focus sunlight on his seedlings during cold nights. The alien instructors began to take notes. The report grew longer each day. Subject displays no fear, converts waste into resources, displays emotional attachment to crops, possible case of adaptive delusion. But the chief instructor crossed out the last words. No, he said. This is not delusion. This is design. By day 14, the plants had doubled in size. Thin stems, wide leaves, rich color. Eli crouched beside them, running a finger gently across the surface of one leaf. The green pigment shimmered faintly in the sunlight. For the first time since his arrival, he laughed, a soft, relieved sound that carried far in the empty air. That night, he looked up at the stars and spoke as if to someone listening. You thought I'd panic, didn't you? You thought I'd quit, but Earth taught us better. We don't run. We rebuild. His voice was calm but full of quiet fire. The instructors replayed that moment again and again. There was no anger, no despair, only determination. A creature that should have broken was instead building a new ecosystem. The entire test, designed to measure desperation, was turning into a study of hope. By the next morning, a thin mist appeared near the camp. The aliens checked the readings. It was moisture drawn from the soil by the plants, the first living water cycle on the barren world. The numbers changed faster each hour. Oxygen up, carbon levels down, life spreading. In the tower, no one spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't confusion anymore. It was awe. Kalor finally leaned closer to the screen. He's rewriting the planet, he said. The assistant turned to him, voice trembling. Should we stop the test? The instructor thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, let it continue. I want to see how far one human can go. Down below, unaware of the growing attention from across the galaxy, Eli sat beside his little garden under the fading red sun. The wind blew softly over the field and the leaves rustled like whispers. He smiled and whispered back, See? I told you we'd grow. And above him, hundreds of alien eyes watched in silence, realizing that for the first time in recorded history, a human had done what no simulation or science had predicted. He had turned dust into life. The storm came without warning. One moment, the horizon was calm and silent. The next, a wall of red dust rose like a tidal wave, swallowing the light. Inside the alien tower, alarms blared. The monitors turned to static as sensors struggled to keep up with the violent winds ripping through the desert. Instructor Kalor cursed under his breath. It's a plasma storm, Category 6. Nothing survives that. The assistant adjusted the screen. We'll lose the human feed in 30 seconds. Kalor leaned closer. Keep it open. I want to see how he dies. But down on the surface, Eli Grant wasn't thinking about dying. The first shockwave hit his camp like a hammer, bending metal panels and throwing dust into his eyes. He blinked hard, tying a piece of torn cloth around his face. The wind howled, the ground shook, and every instinct screamed run. But he didn't. He stood tall in the storm, holding down the frame of his makeshift greenhouse with both hands. The thin plastic rippled like a sail, threatening to tear apart. Not today, Eli muttered. You're not taking this from me. He grabbed melted alloy rods and jammed them into the ground, anchoring the frame deeper. Lightning flashed across the sky, a burning arc that split the horizon. For hours, the storm raged, hurling shards of debris across the desert. Eli's skin stung, his muscles burned, and every breath felt like sandpaper. Still, he didn't stop. In the tower, the instructors watched in disbelief as the feed flickered. For brief seconds, they saw him, covered in dust, moving like a shadow in chaos. Then the screen went black. He's gone, the assistant said quietly. Wait, Kalor replied, his voice low. Just wait. The storm lasted 12 hours. When it finally ended, the entire desert lay buried under red dunes. The other test sites were gone, structures flattened, sensors destroyed. The tower staff worked through the night to restore visuals. Most of them didn't expect to see anything but wreckage. When the image finally cleared, there was silence in the control room. Eli's camp still stood. The metal panels had been rearranged into a strange pattern, almost like the ribs of a giant animal. They had absorbed the brunt of the wind. Inside, the greenhouse shimmered under the sunlight, dusty, dented, but alive. The crops were intact. Kalor's jaw tightened. He reinforced it, he said slowly. Before the storm hit, he must have known. The assistant shook his head. He shouldn't have. Our systems didn't detect the storm until minutes before impact. Kalor exhaled. Then he felt it coming. Down below, Eli was busy at work again. He cleaned dust from the greenhouse roof, checked each plant carefully and repaired cracks with melted glass. His lips moved as he worked, no panic, no frustration, just focus. When he was done, he looked straight up at the sky and waved. In the tower, a few aliens actually laughed. It wasn't mockery this time, it was something else, admiration. "He's waving at us," one said. Kalor nodded slowly. "He knows we're watching." Eli took a deep breath and sat down beside his plants. He whispered, "You did good, little ones. You held on." Then he smiled faintly and leaned back against the metal wall, exhausted but alive. The instructors zoomed in on the vegetation. The plants had changed color, darker green, thicker stems. The readings showed they had absorbed trace minerals from the dust storm. They had adapted. "This is new," the assistant murmured. "He's pushing evolution forward." Kalor looked thoughtful. Maybe he's not the only one surviving anymore. Later that night, as the desert cooled, Eli made a small fire near his shelter. He ate half a ration bar, saving the rest for later. The sky above him was full of stars, brighter now that the storm had cleared. He stared at them in silence, then began to speak softly, his words carried by the wind. "You tried to break me with emptiness. You tried to bury me in dust. But you forgot something." He looked at his plants and smiled. "Humans were made from dirt. We just know how to turn it into home." The drones caught every word. In the observation tower, the chief instructor ordered silence. No one spoke. The feed felt sacred somehow. Hours later, when the night grew colder, Eli wrapped himself in a makeshift blanket and closed his eyes. The plants around him swayed slightly in the wind, their roots deep in the transformed soil. For the first time since the experiment began, the atmospheric readings shifted, oxygen up by 3%. The planet was healing, even if only a little. At dawn, the sunlight poured through the greenhouse, glinting off the glass and metal. Eli woke to the sound of his wind chime, bent but still ringing softly. He stepped outside, stretched, and looked over the horizon. "Day 17, he said quietly. "Still not dead. Let's see what's next." Back in the tower, Instructor Kalor updated the log. His voice trembled slightly as he dictated. "Human subject has endured storm conditions lethal to 97% of known species. Structure intact. Flora survived. Subject morale rising." He paused, staring at the last line before adding one more note. "Observation. Subject appears to enjoy the challenge." The assistant gave a weak laugh. "Enjoy? He almost died." Kalor shook his head slowly. "That's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't see this as a test. He sees it as a chance." Down below, the human whistled an old tune from Earth and began rearranging stones again. The aliens watched, realizing something profound. Eli Grant wasn't waiting for rescue. He was building something meant to last. And though none of them dared to say it aloud, a single thought spread among the instructors like wildfire. If one human can turn a dead planet into life, what happens when there's more than one? The message from the council came through before sunrise. The alien instructors had gathered around the main console when the order appeared in glowing blue letters across the screen. Initiate field observation. Human subject to be assessed in person. For a long moment, no one spoke. Instructor Kalor read the message twice, his claws tapping slowly on the table. "They want us to land there?" he asked, half in disbelief. "We've never interfered before." The assistant nodded nervously. "The High Council says his results are distorting the training data. They want visual confirmation that the feed isn't a malfunction." Kalor turned toward the window where the dead planet glowed faintly red beneath the clouds. "Very well," he said finally. "Prepare the landing craft. Let's see the human farmer with our own eyes." Eli Grant was already awake when the ship descended through the orange sky. He had been checking his irrigation lines, thin plastic tubes that carried melted frost water through trenches he had carved with a salvaged panel. His small field had doubled in size. Rows of green leaves now swayed gently in the morning breeze, a soft wave of color against the barren world. He looked up as the shadow fell across his camp. The alien craft settled nearby, its landing legs hissing steam. Eli didn't move. He simply wiped sweat from his forehead and kept working. When the hatch opened, 3 figures stepped out: Kalor, his assistant, and the chief council observer. Their tall frames shimmered in the sunlight, armor gleaming silver blue. The air around them rippled from their energy fields. They expected the human to be afraid, maybe to fall to his knees or hide. Instead, he waved at them casually, like greeting neighbors. "Morning," Eli said, voice calm. "You're just in time for breakfast." The aliens glanced at each other, uncertain. Kalor approached slowly. "Human subject, Eli Grant, you have exceeded all test parameters." Eli smiled faintly. "Good to hear. Thought I'd at least get a gold star for effort." The assistant blinked. "You are aware this environment is designated for survival testing, not agriculture." "Yeah, I noticed," Eli said, crouching beside a plant. "But surviving's boring. Growing things feels better." He pulled a small root from the soil, rough, brown, but unmistakably alive, and held it out. "Want to try it?" Clore hesitated, then took it carefully, scanning it with a wrist device. The readings went wild. Edible, high nutrient value. "You cultivated this from dust?" Eli grinned. "Dust, sweat, and luck." "Mostly luck." The aliens stood in silence. Around them, the wind carried the scent of something none of them had ever experienced on that world. Fresh vegetation. The chief council observer finally spoke. "Why?" His voice was deep, almost metallic. "This planet was meant to test endurance. You were not expected to create comfort." Eli straightened, his expression thoughtful. "Because endurance without purpose is just waiting to die. You gave me 30 days to prove I could live here. I decided to actually live." Kalor looked around at the field again. The plants shimmered under the sun, leaves coated with a thin layer of protective wax. Birds, small gray creatures drawn by the new air, circled overhead. Life was spreading faster than anyone predicted. "You changed the ecosystem," the assistant said quietly. "This planet wasn't designed for balance." Eli shrugged. "Then I guess it's learning." He reached into a small pouch and pulled out another handful of seeds. "These came from Earth. Nothing special, just the kind that grow when no one's looking. My dad used to say you can't fight nature, you can only invite it." The aliens recorded everything, scanning the soil, the air, the temperature. Every number defied their models. The human had done more in 3 weeks than entire species had in years of simulation. After a moment, Kalor crouched down beside the plants. "You talk to them," he said. "Why?" Eli smiled. "Because they listen." The assistant whispered almost to himself. "He's not surviving the test. He's rewriting it." The council observer's armor glowed brighter. "Enough," he said sharply. "End the trial. This planet will be reclassified. The subject will be extracted," Eli frowned. "Extracted? No, these aren't ready yet. I can't just leave." Kalor looked at him in disbelief. "You want to stay?" Eli nodded. "I didn't come here to prove I could last 30 days. I came to see if life could." The aliens exchanged uncertain looks. Their orders were clear, but something about the humans' calm, defiant tone made them hesitate. For the first time, they realized the experiment wasn't testing him anymore. He was testing them. Eli knelt and began covering the roots again, his voice low. "You can't grow anything worth keeping if you pull it out too early. Give it time." Kalor stared at him for a long moment, then turned to the council observer. "He's right," he said quietly. "This is not failure. This is evolution." The observer hesitated, then finally nodded once. "Very well. Continue observation. No interference." As the ship lifted off, the aliens looked down from above. Eli's camp glowed faintly in the fading light, a green heartbeat against the red wasteland. In the tower later, Kalor made his final entry for the day. Human subject demonstrates not resistance to hardship, but transformation of it. He converts adversity into opportunity, a lesson worth remembering. Far below, under a violet sky, Eli sat beside his growing crops, humming softly to himself. The plants swayed to the rhythm of his song, their roots deep, their leaves strong. He smiled and whispered, "Told you we'd make it." And for the first time in the long history of alien trials, the observers felt something they couldn't explain: hope. The morning after the visit felt different. The air was cooler, gentler, alive in a way that no one in the galaxy's training division had ever experienced on that planet. In the observation tower, the readings came in like a storm of contradictions. Oxygen levels climbing, soil temperatures balancing, radiation dropping. It made no sense. The instructors had run thousands of survival tests across hundreds of worlds, but never had the world itself begun to change back. Instructor Kalor stood before the main screen, staring at the new data lines. "This shouldn't be happening," he muttered. "Our simulations don't allow self-repair. The system doesn't evolve." The assistant looked at him nervously. Unless something inside is forcing it to. They both turned toward the live feed. On the barren surface below, Eli Grant was standing at the edge of his green field, watching dawn break over his tiny farm. The light glinted off the metal panels she'd reworked into irrigation mirrors. Beyond them, mist rolled lazily over the red dunes. Real moisture, real clouds. The ecosystem had begun to loop. Eli rubbed his jaw, looking proud but thoughtful. His small garden had grown beyond a patch. It was now a living stretch of green cutting through the desert like a scar of hope. Strange local insects had moved in, feeding on the plants. Birds nested under his shelter's roof. Life had returned where none was meant to exist. He didn't know the alien scientists above were panicking. He just knew that the air smelled different, and for the first time the planet didn't feel empty. Hours later, the first system failure hit. A red alarm blinked across the observation deck. Simulation barrier integrity breached, the system announced. Kalor's head snapped up. Define breach. The AI voice responded, planetary variables diverging from programmed range. Natural processes no longer responding to control algorithms. In simple words, the world had stopped obeying. Impossible, the assistant whispered. He can't rewrite the environment. He's just one human. Kalor stared at the growing green zone on the map. Maybe he doesn't have to rewrite it, he said slowly. Maybe he just reminded it what to be. Down on the planet, Eli was working again. He had built a larger structure from pod fragments, a half-dome that reflected sunlight into his field. He checked the plants, trimmed the leaves, hummed a song his mother used to sing when she watered their garden back on Earth. His voice carried softly through the air, mixing with the hum of new life. He didn't notice the drone hovering nearby until it beeped twice. He glanced up. You again, huh? He grinned at the tiny machine. Don't worry, buddy. You're part of the team now. He tossed a small seed at the drone's base and laughed when it bounced off. Guess you're not much of a gardener. The drone recorded every word. The aliens who watched the feed in silence didn't know whether to laugh or take notes. By midday, the storm readings began forming again. But this time, the energy patterns didn't match any known phenomenon. The storms were gathering around the planet's magnetic poles, stabilizing instead of destroying. This is no longer a test world, Kalor said, eyes wide. It's becoming a real one. The assistant swallowed hard. Do we terminate it? No, said the chief observer, entering the room. His voice was calm, almost reverent. We learn. Back on the surface, Eli was busy collecting mineral shards that had washed up after the plasma storm. He stacked them around the perimeter of his camp, creating a natural barrier to the wind. When he touched one of the crystals, it flickered faintly, absorbing the ambient energy. He paused, an idea forming. He arranged the shards in a circle, connecting them with bits of metal wire scavenged from the pod. Then, as night fell, the circle began to glow, soft blue light spreading outward like veins through the soil. It illuminated the plants, and Eli smiled at the sight. Guess we're upgrading to night shift. The light reached the nearest sensor node and caused another cascade failure in the alien systems. Energy grid compromised, the tower AI reported. Lore watched the map in silence. He just gave the planet its own power source. He doesn't even know what he's doing, the assistant whispered. That's the terrifying part, Kalor replied. At midnight, the simulation's outer shell finally cracked. The containment field shimmered and fell, like fog dissolving under sunlight. What was supposed to be an isolated holographic test world was now visible to nearby satellites. A living planet, blue and green shining faintly in the void. The Council's communication line opened immediately. Report, demanded the High Command. Kalor stood straight. The simulation is gone. The planet is alive. The humans' actions have triggered spontaneous environmental regeneration. Can you reverse it? Kalor looked at the glowing screen, at Eli Grant asleep beside his small campfire, surrounded by the soft hum of living air. No, he said quietly, and I don't think we should. When morning came, Eli woke to a sight that made him freeze. The sky was blue, not the sickly red haze he'd known since landing, real blue like Earth's. He stood there, speechless, feeling the warmth of the new sun on his skin. The plants seemed brighter. The air was easy to breathe. He looked around, whispering, "You did it, didn't you?" He laughed softly. You crazy little planet, you actually listened. In the tower above, Kalor ended his final entry for the day. Human subject has transcended the experiment. The environment now mirrors his intent. Observation complete, lesson ongoing. He turned off the recording and leaned back. We tried to test his limits, he said to the room. But he showed us ours. Down on the surface, Eli sat in the new grass holding one of the first plants he'd grown. He pressed a seed into the soil and smiled. Let's see how far you can go. And far above him, the alien instructors realized something extraordinary. The experiment hadn't just created life on a planet. It had reborn one.